If it is our dream to backpack hundreds of miles on the Appalachian Trail, if we want to find fun, growth, and spirituality on the AT, there's something standing in our way. And that something is the fact the trail goes over the tops of hundreds of steep and tall hills. As I have said, elevation changes on the AT average 212 feet a mile in 2017. On that average terrain, a 10-mile day is 2,100 feet up and down, a 15-mile day is 3,000 feet. And on the really hilly sections, the climbs are considerably higher. If our goal is hundreds of miles on the AT, we have to go over hill after hill after hill and be ready for more. This raises a few questions. Could we exhaust ourselves if we try to climb too fast? Will we be upset and demoralized if we climb too slowly? If we are a novice, can we diagnose our hill climbing ability in advance? Can we protect our feet and legs from wear and tear? Can we do anything to give ourselves an advantage? This video will look at those questions. I have told about a 12-day backpacking trip I made in New Mexico when I was 14 years old. That trip included a lot of climbs like this one. Most of the time I was carrying a pack that weighed at least 25 pounds, yet I have absolutely no memory of those climbs being difficult or even strenuous. Compare that to an adult leader who went with us. At the top of a hill during a training hike, the boys in our group stared at this guy after the climb as he stood there gasping and panting for breath. He got angry and yelled at us that he'd like to see how well we would do when we were 50 years old. Well, I got to find out how I would do at age 50 and beyond, and I did it on the Appalachian Trail, where the hills are worse than the ones in New Mexico. If for no other reason, there are more of them and they are unending. As it turned out, I did fairly okay at age 50 without much hyperventilating, but since then there has been big trouble. As I have said in several videos, I walked with a bad limp for more than 2 years after getting banged up in a head-on car accident. My level of physical fitness went down the drain. A couple of doctors eventually straightened me out, and it's been a long recovery. I'm trying to get my old backpacking ability back. My plan to pull that off is mostly doing a lot of miles up and downhill, and I also have a new trick up my sleeve that I think will help. More on that later. The immediate point is this makes me a good example of somebody whose capability is pretty much at the bottom of the barrel. So how about the other end of the spectrum? It might be impossible to predict how any individual might perform, but there are some generalities to keep in mind. If somebody lives near the AT and walks on those hills all the time, I'm putting my money on them. It's an advantage I wish I had. I also envy those who can climb the big hills near their home in other areas of the country. For example, the American West. In the West, however, we do not routinely encounter the volume of rocks that litter the AT's hills by the millions. Footing is often terrible there, and it increases the overall difficulty. Youth has to be another great advantage. I was a great hill climber when I was 14, in large part because I was only 14 years old. All else being equal, I would guess anybody age 40 and under, at least, should be as much of a sure thing on the AT's hills as an 18-year-old. There are, of course, times when not all else is equal. For example, if somebody rapidly develops a problem or injury with a knee or their feet. Of course, many people over the age of 40 are going to get those hills done, but statistics have to get progressively more dubious as age increases. That can be countered to a large degree if we make efforts to stay physically fit as we age, which I talked about in another video, links in the description. One good example, by the way, is Emma Gatewood, the first solo female AT thru hiker who made her first thru hike at age 67 in 1955. As this book tells, she was physically active all her life and trained in advance for that first thru hike. I'm not qualified to offer advice to anyone who suffers a foot, knee, or leg injury or similar problem on the AT. I would suggest talking to our doctor if we have had past problems or expect future problems. A physician might suggest insoles, knee wraps, compression socks, or other preventive measures that could help. Besides fitness, I can think of at least 3 other strategies to enhance our endurance when climbing hills. 2 are well known. The third borders on a secret because it's virtually never discussed. The common strategies are keeping pack weight as low as we reasonably can and using trekking poles. I've done videos about those, links in the description. If we can consistently put 10 pounds of downward pressure on our poles as we climb, It has the same effect of making our pack 10 pounds lighter. I also have found trekking poles to provide a margin of safety. Dozens, if not hundreds of times, my poles have helped me keep my balance when I was about to fall. They also can reduce stress on our knees when descending steep hills. Our next topic is that significant detail about hill climbing that, like I said, is almost never discussed. As I prepare for a return to section hiking, I have pondered my past inadequacies. I can see that my pacing when climbing hills was not very good. I had seen on the trail how some thru hikers would walk at what seemed like a fairly modest pace on level ground, yet they maintained that pace of at least 2 miles an hour going up steep hills. By comparison, I tended to start too fast uphill, which tended to eventually wear me out. This contrast hit me even more vividly when I read Earl Schaefer's account of his 1948 AT thru hike. When he started that hike, he was 29 years old and in excellent shape. In Virginia, along a one-time section of the trail north of the village of Dan, Schaefer started to pass mile markers. He decided to count his steps between the markers, and he found he was doing 2,000 steps a mile on fairly level terrain. Going up the steep hills, he said, that number of steps per mile doubled to 4,000. It would be easy to read that without giving it a second thought. But, as it happens, I know that on fairly level ground, I used to cover 3 feet with a single step, a little under 1,800 steps a mile. A calculator will tell us if we use Schaefer's 4,000 steps a mile when climbing, that's only 16 inches for a single step. The significance of this did not hit me until I tried walking that way. Based on the way I used to walk, a 16-inch step is pretty short. I would invite anybody to put a yardstick on the ground to get an idea of how short it is. I decided to try climbing with 18-inch steps, the idea being that if I used 18-inch steps and make 2 steps every second, I would be moving uphill at 2 miles an hour. If we can consistently move at 2 miles an hour up average AT hills, we are definitely in business. There is more to this story, but first I have to tell you about the hill I've been using. Hills are scarce in central Ohio, where I live. This is a man-made sledding hill at a park not far from my house. If my measurement is any good, it's 23 feet tall. The important detail, however, is that this is a 20-degree slope, which is much steeper than anything else within 80 miles of me. Even more important is the fact that if I cover a mile walking up and down this thing, the elevation totals about 417 feet, and that far exceeds the 212 feet per mile on average AT terrain. The payoff came when I started climbing, trying to use 18-inch steps. The climbing immediately got easier. I could keep moving without having to breathe as hard. I didn't have to stop for a few seconds because my legs or feet were burning. It felt like I was climbing quite slowly, but no. The fitness app on my phone told me my steps were longer than 18 inches. I was nowhere near the roughly 3,500 steps a mile I should be getting with 18-inch steps. Instead, I had only taken 2,300 steps, and that mile took a little under 20 minutes instead of the 30 minutes it should have taken. The main point, I think, is even though I was doing it wrong, it was far better than not doing it at all. The physical effort was reduced. My legs and feet were not straining as hard. I clearly don't have the smart pace down yet, but that's okay at the moment. If I go too fast, it's good aerobic exercise, and I'll take it for the time being. I'll work harder on the pacing when I get closer to my next section hike, which probably will be in the fall. AT hikers are often advised to start slowly with low mileage days, and that's pretty good advice. But even if we do that, any urge to rush uphill too quickly could wear us out just as bad as a big mileage day. Many AT hills have a slope steeper than 20 degrees, and that pretty much forces us to climb on the balls of our feet. One side of my hill, the right, as it's shown here, gets steeper than 20 degrees, and I do have to use the balls of my feet to climb up that side. To be sure, a number of AT hills are so steep and rocky that many of us are forced to move slower than 2 miles an hour. But if we can keep moving at 2 miles an hour up most AT hills, at least south of the White Mountains, we are physically capable of doing long distances. A few other footnotes about AT mountains. Weather can get very bad and very cold in the White Mountains in New Hampshire. Signs at the White Mountains National Park warn that, quote, many have died of exposure even in summer. They also warn us to, quote, turn back now if the weather is bad. Also on the northern end of the AT, some rocks are so big and steep that steel handholds have been installed to help us climb over them. Even elsewhere on the AT, bad weather can mean trouble, especially on open hilltops. Lightning strikes have killed AT hikers in those areas. My AT hiking has been south of Pennsylvania, and in that area, as I have said, I have not hesitated to stealth camp in the trees on hilltops or ridge lines. I should point out, this works for me because every tent I have used or will use on the AT can be zipped up entirely and has walls staked right to the ground. Wind is kept out. These details mean I can endure strong wind, blowing rain, and blowing snow because I certainly have endured those conditions off the AT. When such weather strikes, wind is bound to be worse near hilltops and ridge lines. For the record, my tents work just fine in hot or humid weather. As I've said, if necessary, I just leave the door open. I use them year-round. And now, we are once again done. My thanks to all my subscribers. If you haven't subscribed, please consider it. And like I always say, thanks a million for watching.